Today is Friday, January 30, 2026. And I don't know about you, but if you've been glued to your news feeds this morning, just doom scrolling, you probably feel like the entire world is holding its breath.
It really does feel that way.
The Persian Gulf isn't just, a regional standoff anymore. We are way past that. We're looking at what might be the single biggest geopolitical flashpoint of the decade.
It is unbelievably tense. I think it's fair to say this is the most dangerous moment we've seen in years.
Hmm.
You have this massive U.S. naval deployment, maybe the largest in recent memory,
Right.
just parked off the coast. Then you have a total information blackout across Iran.
Yep.
And then you have these very nervous capitals from Beijing to Brussels just waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Exactly. And trying to make sense of the actual news right now feels, well, impossible. It's just noise.
It is.
You have one side shouting Armada and shock and awe, and the other side shouting 200% readiness, and then just this terrifying silence in between.
So for today's deep dive, we are going to do what we always do.
Strip away the cable news noise. We're stripping it all away. We are looking at a fascinating, and I have to say, slightly terrifying document called A Bayesian Game Theoretic Analysis of the 2026 Persian Gulf Crisis.
It's a report by Farid Novin from the Global Review. And I know, that title sounds like homework.
It really does. Bayesian Game Theoretic Analysis. I mean, it sounds like something you need a PhD in statistics to even open. But you promised me this is the perfect tool for regular people to understand today's headlines.
It is. Don't let the academic jargon scare you off. Look, Bayesian reasoning sounds dense, but it's actually incredibly practical. It's basically a framework for how to think when you don't have all the facts.
Okay.
It asks, how do we update what we think we know based on new incomplete signals in a really confusing game?
So instead of pretending we know the future, we're adjusting our bets based on the cards we can actually see.
Exactly. It's about decoding the shadow game. Because, as the source makes crystal clear, this is not just a duel between the U.S. and Iran.
No.
This is a four-player game.
No.
You have Washington and Tehran on the field, absolutely. But you have Beijing and Moscow watching from the stands, calculating the odds, and deciding if or when they're going to jump in.
Okay, so let's start with the player making the most noise right now, which is Washington. The rhetoric coming out of the White House this week has been specific and, frankly, pretty aggressive. President Trump didn't just call it a deployment.
No, he called it a massive armada.
A massive armada.
He did. And the centerpiece is the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, flanked by Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. It's a lot of firepower. But the source highlights a really specific and a surprising comparison the president made.
Right, on January 29th, just yesterday.
Just yesterday. He explicitly compared this operation to the special ops raid that extracted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro back on January 3rd.
Which is a wild comparison. I mean, think about that. The Maduro extraction was a scalpel. It was a lightning-fast raid, in and out. This carrier group, this is a sledgehammer.
It's a sledgehammer, heavy iron.
So why make that comparison?
It's psychological. The comparison isn't about the size of the force. It's about the speed. Novin points out that Trump is signaling kinetic resolution. He's telling the world, and specifically the regime in Tehran, this isn't going to be Iraq 2.0.
Right. We're not coming to occupy you for 10 years.
No, we are coming to break you in 48 hours.
And that aligns with the message he sent to the Iranian protesters, doesn't it? The "Hello P is on its way" statement. It implies a deadline.
Precisely. It implies an arrival time.
Yeah.
And looking at the source, Israeli intelligence is implicitly setting a deadline for January 31st or February 1st. That's this weekend.
Wow.
But here's the tactical nugget from the report that I found absolutely fascinating. U.S. intelligence has been moving B-2 bomber decoys toward Guam.
Decoys. Wait, so like fake planes. Why move fake bombers to Guam if the fight is in the Middle East?
To confuse the tracking systems, it's a classic shell game. If you're a Chinese or Iranian satellite operator, you look at your screen and you see shapes consistent with B-2s moving toward the Pacific. You have to ask,
Is the U.S. pivoting to Asia? Is this a feint?
is it a feint? Meanwhile, the real punch, the actual bomber squadrons, are quietly packing up for the Arabian Sea.
That's incredibly devious. It's like a magician waving his left hand so you don't watch what the right hand is doing.
And it's all part of a doctrine that the source calls flash suppression.
Okay, let's unpack that term. Flash suppression. Sounds like a setting on a camera, but I'm guessing it means something much more violent here.
Think of it as temporal compression. The U.S. military has realized, especially after the last couple of decades, that it cannot afford a long war in the Middle East anymore.
Why not?
Because of China. The Pentagon is terrified of getting bogged down in the sand while Beijing makes a move on Taiwan.
So flash suppression is the solution to that strategic anxiety.
Yes, the doctrine is about applying massive, overwhelming force in a really strict 48 to 72-hour window.
2 to 3 days. That's the entire war plan.
That's the goal. Strike the command and control centers, hit the nuclear infrastructure, degrade the air defenses, and then, and this is crucial, pull the high-value assets back out.
And there's a precedent for this, right?
The source mentions the June 2025 war, where U.S. B-2s hit buried facilities, and they met their objectives in about 12 days. Now the planners want to do it even faster.
So the logic is, hit hard, hit fast, break the regime, and get the fleet back to the Pacific before Xi Jinping can even mobilize.
That's it, exactly. It's designed to minimize the window of vulnerability in the Indo-Pacific. They want to prove they can walk and chew gum at the same time, but they want to chew that gum really, really fast.
Okay, so that's the plan from Washington. Shock and awe on fast forward. Let's flip the map. What is going on inside Iran? Because the source mentions something called epistemic constraints, which is a very polite academic way of saying
We have no idea what's actually happening.
yeah.
And that is the defining feature of this crisis from the Iranian side. Since January 8th, there's been a near-total internet blackout.
Which means we're not seeing the TikToks, the tweets, the live streams of the protests. It's just a void.
A total void. The unrest started back on December 28th, driven by hyperinflation, currency collapse. People were in the streets. But once that blackout hit, the ground truth just vanished.
So casualty figures, for example?
The source says they're deeply contested.
Hmm.
The regime says they're fighting foreign terrorists. The diaspora says it's a massacre. So the U.S. and the G7 are making these huge decisions under conditions of deep uncertainty.
And amidst all this, you have the Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, claiming 200% readiness.
Which is classic deterrent bluffing. It's what you say when you're staring down an armada. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, the source warns us not to swing too far the other way.
You mean don't buy into the paper tiger narrative?
Exactly.
Right.
Because I think a lot of people look at U.S. military tech, the F-35s, the B-21s, and then look at Iran's Air Force, which is still flying F-14s from the Top Gun era,
Right.
and they think this is going to be a cakewalk. And that's just a dangerous way to think.
So what's the counter-argument?
The source cites an Israeli military analyst, Brigadier General Relik Shafir, who points out that while the U.S. has total tech superiority, Iran has what he calls asymmetric resilience.
Asymmetric resilience? What does that mean? They fight dirty or just differently?
They fight in a way that negates the U.S. tech advantage. They have hardened, redundant infrastructure tunnels deep underground that even massive ordnance might not destroy in one go.
Okay.
And they have what the source calls the asymmetric paradox. It means their planes will probably be grounded or destroyed in hour one, but they have thousands of drones, ballistic missiles, and proxy forces like the Houthis and Hezbollah.
And the source mentioned the Houthi attacks from 2024 and 2025 as a real warning here, right?
Yes. I mean, think back to that. The Houthis, a rebel group in Yemen, managed to force U.S. carriers to reposition using cheap drones and missiles. They shut down shipping lanes.
With, like, leftovers.
Oh.
Iran has the actual factories.
Precisely. The USS Abraham Lincoln has incredible defenses, but saturation attacks, sending 1,000 cheap drones at once, can overwhelm even the best computers. You fire enough cheap metal at a billion-dollar ship, eventually something gets through.
So the U.S. plan is flash suppression, get in and out. Iran's plan is make it messy, make it long, and bleed them out.
That's the game. Turn that temporal compression into a temporal bog.
Which brings us to the shadow game. Because while Trump and the Ayatollah are in this staring contest, the most important moves might be happening in Beijing. This was the part of the deep dive that really surprised me.
Yeah.
We always hear about this axis of evil or the crink axis, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea.
Right, the narrative is that they're the new NATO.
But the source says not so much.
It explicitly argues there is no crink axis in the way we think of an alliance. There's no Article 5 that says an attack on one is an attack on all. It is purely transactional.
And we saw a perfect example of this with the Will for Peace 2026 naval exercise.
Oh, the snub. It was the snub of the century.
I saw a headline about this, but I didn't realize the significance.
So this was supposed to be a joint naval exercise. China, Russia, Iran, South Africa. A big show of multipolar solidarity. But on January 13th, President Trump threatened a 25% tariff on anyone doing business with Iran.
And China's response was?
They blinked immediately. Iran was downgraded to observer status at the last minute. The Chinese Navy ship, the CNS Tangshan, was right there in the region and did nothing. It didn't dock, didn't engage, it just floated.
That is just cold.
It's realist. The source calls it opportunistic restraint. Beijing's priority is their economy and the Indo-Pacific. They are happy to offer moral support to Iran, but they will not catch a falling knife, especially if it costs them 25% tariffs.
Which connects back to what the source called the resource strain thesis, right?
Yes, this is how Chinese strategists see the world. They believe that every single Tomahawk missile the U.S. fires in an Iranian bunker is one less missile available to defend Taiwan.
So they might actually want the U.S. to get involved, to a certain degree.
To a point. They want the U.S. distracted and drained. They want U.S. military sensors focused on the desert, not the South China Sea. But they don't want a total regional collapse that sends oil prices through the roof.
It's a delicate balance.
They're hedging. And Russia, well, Russia's just too busy. The source is blunt. They are focused on Ukraine. They might offer asylum to some Iranian leaders if things go south. But they are not sending the cavalry. They just don't have the bandwidth.
So Iran is essentially on its own, kinetically speaking.
In a kinetic sense, yes. They are alone in the cage.
All right, so we've got the players, we've got their strategies. Now, the source uses this Bayesian method to map out 4 specific scenarios for how this ends, and they put percentage probabilities on them.
Right. And it's important to remember, these are based on the situation as of today, January 30th. If a ship gets hit tomorrow, these numbers all change.
Okay, so let's start with scenario alpha. They call it surgical collapse. They give it a 40 to 45% chance. This is the most likely outcome.
This is basically the flash suppression doctrine, working as intended. A massive U.S. air campaign, 48 to 72 hours, and the goal is regime fragmentation.
So you hit the leadership so hard that the different power centers, the IRGC, the army, the clerics, they all turn on each other.
The snake starts eating its own tail. The regime collapses from within because of the external shock.
But the risk here is that collapse is messy.
Extremely messy. As we talked about, you can break the state,
Yeah.
but those asymmetric forces don't just disappear. We'll get to that problem in a minute.
Okay. Next is scenario beta, negotiated freeze. They give that a 30 to 35% chance.
This is the off-ramp. The pressure gets so high, existential, that Tehran blinks. Mediators step in, maybe the Swiss or the Omanis, and a deal gets hammered out.
But the source mentions snapback strike authority. What's that?
It means any deal would come with a trigger. If you break this promise, we bomb you immediately, no new authorization needed. It's a very fragile peace.
Peace with a gun to the head.
Exactly.
Now I get to the scary ones. Scenario gamma, Pacific trap, 15 to 20% chance.
This is the nightmare for the Pentagon. This is where flash suppression fails. The U.S. attacks, Iran doesn't fold. They use those mines, those drones, the proxies, and the conflict drags on for weeks, maybe months.
And while the U.S. is bogged down,
China makes a move. Maybe they quarantine Taiwan. Maybe they push harder in the South China Sea because they know the U.S. carrier fleet is stuck. This is the resource drain thesis coming true.
that is the one that keeps generals up at night. And finally, scenario delta, protracted stalemate, just a 5 to 10% chance.
This is just the meat grinder. Negotiations fail. The strikes don't finish the job. But China doesn't move either. It just turns into a long, grinding war of attrition. Nobody wins, everybody bleeds.
Wow. So looking at those odds, it's basically a coin flip between a quick U.S. win and a very messy, dangerous escalation.
Which is why the tension is so high. The margins for error are razor thin.
So if we step back, what does this all mean for us watching this unfold? We've got epistemic opacity, flash suppression, and shadow games.
I think the big lesson here, the thing the listener needs to take away, is about the danger of misreading restraint.
What do you mean by that?
Just because China and Russia aren't shooting right now, just because they snubbed Iran at that naval exercise, it does not mean they are weak or disengaged. They are waiting.
Right.
In a multipolar world, you don't always fight your enemy directly. Sometimes you let them exhaust themselves fighting someone else. The source really emphasizes this. Misinterpreting this hedging as abandonment could make the U.S. overconfident.
It's like poker. Just because they folded this hand doesn't mean they're out of the game.
They're just saving their chips.
Yeah.
And the other side of that coin is Iran. Just because they're silent under a blackout doesn't mean they're helpless. The silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is where miscalculations happen.
There is one final thought I want to leave everyone with, something the source touched on about the region after a potential collapse. We talk about regime change like it's a light switch. You flip it, the bad guys are gone, and the lights come on.
And history suggests it's not that simple. Iraq, Libya, Syria.
Exactly. The source argues that the axis of resistance, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militias in Iraq, they aren't just puppets. We act like if you cut the string in Tehran, the puppet just falls down.
But they're not puppets. They're allies with their own agency and their own
Yeah.
huge stockpiles of weapons.
Exactly. So here's the provocative thought. If scenario alpha happens and the Iranian central state collapses, does the region actually stabilize? Or do we just unleash a dozen heavily armed, battle-hardened groups who suddenly have no central phone number to call?
That's the terrifying question. You might cut off the head of the octopus, but what if the arms keep fighting on their own?
Mm.
And now they're desperate and leaderless. You haven't solved the problem. You've just made it decentralized and impossible to negotiate with.
A swarm instead of an army.
A swarm is much harder to fight.
A chaotic swarm. It makes you wonder if the flash suppression plan accounts for what happens on day 4. On that cheery note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive.
Look for the signals, not just the noise.
It is a developing situation, obviously, but hopefully you now have the framework to understand what you're seeing in the news this weekend. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.